Welcome to Thought in Motion, the seminars of Jacques Lacan. I'm changing the style of presentation for this video as an experiment to see if it facilitates a better learning experience. Instead of including myself in the video, I'll provide a visual demonstration of Lacan's ideas, sort of in the style of the Khan Academy. Perhaps we'll call this the Lacan Academy. I would be interested to hear if you prefer this style. Please feel free to leave a comment below if you have a preference either way. And if you enjoy this video, consider subscribing to my channel. Today's video covers Lecture 10 in Seminar 1, entitled The Two Narcissisms. What is the libido? According to Lacan, the Freudian discovery was to connect libido with neurosis, seeing neuroses as an indirect manner of satisfying the libido. But this left unanswered the question about psychoses and the place of libido there. It would be left to his former disciple Carl Jung to provide an answer. And his answer was that psychosis emerges out of an inverted and metamorphosed libido. He could draw this conclusion because he saw libido first attached from its sexual meaning and also as a sort of ubiquitous energy that unites with the ego, so that there's no true gap between the ego and libido. This led Freud to accuse Jung of psychic pantheism. It was very important for Freud, from an analytic perspective, to maintain the distinction of two drives. But why is this? Freud suggests maybe at an earlier point that there was in fact one energy source, that the ego drives and libidinal drives were intermingled and undistinguishable. However, this period precedes what can be meaningfully addressed in psychoanalysis. And so for all intents and purposes, he suggested that psychoanalysis found its theory on the two drives. He uses the analogy of an inheritance in which an individual invokes a universal kinship of all humans, since we're all genetically related at some level, as proof of deserving the inheritance. In other words, to reduce everything to one drive would wash out the unique contribution of psychoanalytic theory. But this leaves open the question, how does the ego emerge from the libido? How do we understand this? Lacan revisits some of Freud's ponderings about the biological origins of this, a sort of substance approach in which Freud went to the concept of a germ theory in evolution, in which there's this immortal substance that gets carried through the reproductive cells, and then there's the parasitic individual who's already dead and really irrelevant. Really, the individual is a vehicle for transporting the immortal substance. This aligns somewhat with the notion of selfish genes proposed by Richard Dawkins. But what is more important is to consider the structural mechanisms that are involved and not necessarily the biological. And according to Lacan, the structural mechanisms involve the functions of the imaginary. And here we see the function split off in two different directions. We have the structuration of reality, which both animals and humans go through. But then humans go through another structuration that involves a fundamental alienation. To understand these two functions of the ego, Lacan returns to the optical schema, which is a bit altered from the last time he presented on this. We can see the first one here, and now you can see the second one, and I've added labels to clarify what each represents. We continue to have the concave mirror, but it's not facing the opposite direction of the eye as it was in the previous one. And rather than the bouquet being inverted, it's now the vase that is, and the bouquet is now standing upright. What is provided here are two images, a real image and a virtual image superimposed upon it. The real image concerns the structuration of reality and deals with what is called a primary narcissism. Herein, reality is organized in a totality, employing certain preformed frameworks. This in part has to do with the experience of the unity of the body and its relationship to the natural world. And for this reason, both animals and humans go through this process. The difference is that for animals, they're very limited in their structurations of reality, and that their strategies are ultimately limited to biological reproduction. We locate this in the imaginary still because animals do rely on the lures, a sort of visual object that can entice the organism into reproduction. But then there's a second layer superimposed upon this that is unique to humans, because humans are not limited to structuring their world with certain preformed frameworks based only in biological sex and reproduction. This opens the possibility of a second narcissism, which is what establishes the subject's fundamental alienation. It brings about a libidinal being in the world, and there are hints of Heidegger's influence in this part. And it makes sense because the world, in Heidegger's understanding, is not about only the natural world, but the world of meaning and relationships, the horizons of understanding that encompass beings. Now, Lacan makes the important distinction that this is a libidinal being rather than just Dasein. As such, this being discloses the unique socialization of sexuality in connection with others in the relationships that are formed. And so the birth of this being is through relations to the other and identifications with them. This other is also called the alter ego or the ego ideal. So this relation to the other provides a reflected image of this ego ideal, which forms the basis for a primordial ego, an ego that is based in the mirror reflection of the other, and hence why this establishes a fundamental alienation. Now, at the end of this lecture, we end with a question, which is, what is the difference between the ego ideal, which was discussed in this lecture, and what is called the ideal ego? And that will be the topic of the next lecture.